The flapping wings of fate. You are standing on the deck of a Roman warship in 249 BCE, the salty tang of the Mediterranean sharp in your nostrils. The vessel rocks gently, its oars idle. Around you, soldiers and sailors murmur nervously, their eyes fixed on a wooden cage. Inside it, a handful of scrawny chickens peck at scattered grain. These are no ordinary birds. They are the pulleri, sacred chickens trained to eat in a way that reveals the will of the gods. Today, their appetites will decide whether Rome's fleet attacks the Carthaginians at Drepana. The practice of augury, reading divine signs through nature, was as bureaucratic as it was mystical. Roman generals relied on priestly augurs to interpret everything from bird flights to thunderclaps, but the sacred chickens were a uniquely high-stakes tool. Before battles, they were starved, then released to peck at ritual wheat cakes. If they ate greedily, flapping their wings and scattering crumbs, a sign called tripudium solistimum, victory was assured. If they refused, the gods disapproved. To ignore their verdict was to risk catastrophe. The commander of this fleet, Publius Claudius Pulcher, was not a patient man. A scion of Rome's proud Claudii family, he had inherited their trademark arrogance, but none of their piety. As the chickens clucked listlessly, refusing to eat, his officers grew uneasy. The men whispered of storm clouds gathering, of Carthaginian ships lurking beyond the horizon. Claudius, however, scoffed. According to the historian Polybius, he snarled and hurled the birds overboard. The message was clear. Rome's legions needed no permission from poultry. But why chickens? The ritual likely originated with the Etruscans, who saw birds as intermediaries between earthly and divine realms. Romans formalized it into a military protocol, blending superstition with psychological warfare. Feeding the chickens was a way to steady the nerves of soldiers, a ritualized gamble to convince them fate was on their side. For Claudius, though, the chickens were mere props. His fleet, undermanned and hastily assembled, was already at a disadvantage. He may have feared that a bad omen would shatter morale entirely. As the birds drowned, Claudius ordered the attack. The fleet rode into open water, sails taut. What happened next would become legend. The Carthaginians, led by Adherbal, outmaneuvered the Romans, using their lighter ships to ram and scatter Claudius's vessels. A sudden storm sealed the disaster, sinking dozens of ships and drowning thousands. Rome lost the battle so decisively that, for years afterward, senators refused to build new warships. But here, in this moment, the chickens are still alive, their wings beating against the cage. The sailors stare at Claudius, torn between duty and dread. What compels a man to defy the gods so boldly? And what does it mean when a civilization's fate hinges on the hunger of birds? The waves of hubris. The sea did not forgive Publius Claudius Pulcher's defiance. As his fleet charged toward the Carthaginian stronghold of Drepana, the skies darkened and the winds shifted. The Romans, trained for close quarters combat, found themselves outmaneuvered by Adherbal's nimble ships. Carthaginian vessels sliced through the disordered Roman lines, their bronze rams splintering hulls. Oars snapped like twigs, and screams mingled with the crash of waves. When the storm struck, a sudden squall from the northeast, it felt like the gods themselves had taken sides. By nightfall, 93 Roman ships lay at the bottom of the sea, and 20,000 men were dead or captured. Claudius, clinging to the wreckage of his flagship, survived. But his career and Rome's naval ambition sank with the chickens. Back in Rome, the Senate seethed. The defeat at Drepana was more than a military disaster. It was a spiritual crisis. Claudius was summoned to stand trial for perduellio, high treason. His crime, not incompetence, but impiety. The prosecution argued that by mocking the sacred chickens, he had alienated the Pax Deorum, the fragile peace between Rome and its gods. The trial became a referendum on tradition itself. Cicero, writing centuries later, noted that Claudius's fate hinged on a single question. Could Rome's leaders bend divine will to human ambition? Or were they forever bound to the flutter of a bird's wing? Claudius's defense was as bold as his command. He claimed the chickens had given a sign. By drowning, they drunk the ocean, a twisted omen of Carthaginian defeat. The Senate, unamused, fined him 120,000 asses and banned him from public office. But the verdict did little to calm the public. Ordinary Romans began to see omens everywhere. Ravens perched on temples, mice gnawing at sacred scrolls, babies born with cleft lips. The Collegium of Augurs, Rome's state-sponsored diviners, scrambled to restore order. New rules were drafted. Henceforth, no military action could proceed without multiple auspices, and any commander who disregarded omens would face exile, not just fines. Yet the question lingered. Why had the gods allowed such a defeat? Some priests argued that Claudius's sacrilege had tainted the entire fleet. Others whispered that Carthage's gods were simply stronger. To rebuild morale, the Senate turned to an older, cruder form of divination, the haruspices, Etruscan soothsayers who read entrails. A bull was sacrificed, its liver examined for dark spots. The verdict: Rome needed to return to pious simplicity. The sacred chickens were retired from naval campaigns, replaced by ritual sacrifices on land. But the story's deepest irony lay in Carthage. The Carthaginians, though victorious, took no joy in the battle. Their own priests warned that killing men who had angered the gods might bring divine retribution. Adherbal, despite his triumph, was quietly sidelined, his name erased from official records. Even the sea seemed to rebel. The storm that sank Rome's fleet also ravaged Carthage's coasts, drowning fishermen and flooding temples. Superstition, it seemed, was a double-edged sword. As for Claudius, he faded into obscurity, his name synonymous with hubris. Yet his legacy haunted Rome. Future generals like Scipio Africanus would perform auguries with exaggerated care, even as they privately rolled their eyes. The poet Ennius captured the mood in a biting couplet. The gods laugh at those who fear chickens, but tremble at those who fear nothing. Still, one mystery remains. Why did the chickens refuse to eat that day? Modern historians suggest a mundane answer: seasickness. The birds, kept in cages below deck during the voyage, were likely too nauseated to peck. But to the Romans, the explanation was irrelevant. What mattered was the pattern, the unbroken chain of cause and effect that bound human ambition to divine whim. As the waves closed over Claudius's fleet, Rome learned a bitter lesson. Even the mightiest empire could drown in the wake of a single scorned chicken. But how would this reshape their future wars and their faith? Feathers and fate. Rome's defeat at Drepana became a cautionary tale etched into the empire's psyche. Yet within a generation, the Republic would rise from the ashes of its naval humiliation, not by rejecting superstition, but by weaponizing it. The sacred chickens returned, though no longer aboard ships. Instead, generals performed land-based auspitia before campaigns, scattering grain in temple courtyards, while sailors trained relentlessly on rowing machines. By the time Scipio Africanus launched his invasion of Carthage in 204 BCE, Rome had rebuilt its fleet, but its commanders had also mastered a new art: bending omens to fit ambition. The siege of Carthage revealed this delicate dance. Scipio, a pragmatic visionary, staged elaborate auguries for his troops. Livy recounts how he released chickens before key battles, ensuring they ate just enough to satisfy tradition. Privately, he mocked the rituals, once quipping, "I fear men who fear chickens more than Carthaginians." Yet publicly, he honored the gods, sacrificing bulls to Jupiter and consulting haruspices before every maneuver. It worked. Carthage fell in 146 BCE, its fields sown with salt, and its libraries burned. Rome's victory was attributed not just to legions, but to restored piety. But the tension between faith and strategy never truly vanished. During the civil wars, Julius Caesar famously ignored an augur's warning of disaster before crossing the Rubicon, declaring, "The die is cast." His successor, Augustus, later enshrined augury into state law, creating a bureaucracy of diviners. The College of Augurs became political theatre, a way to legitimize power rather than commune with the divine. By the 1st century CE, the sacred chickens were relics, their role reduced to ceremonial clucking at temple dedications. Still, traces of the old beliefs lingered in unexpected places. Soldiers carried amulets shaped like phalluses to ward off the evil eye. Farmers whispered prayers to Rabigus, the god of wheat rust, as they plowed. Even emperors weren't immune. Nero consulted astrologers to avoid unlucky days, while Marcus Aurelius wrote stoic meditations on accepting fate, even as he carried a raven's feather in his cloak for protection. Modern scholars often frame Rome's superstitions as quaint folklore, but their legacy is profound. The word augur survives in inaugurate, a nod to the ritual of seeking divine approval. The concept of omens shapes our language of a risk assessment, from stock market portents to medical prognoses. And in a world still grappling with pandemics and climate crises, the human impulse to seek patterns in chaos, to sacrifice logic at the altar of ritual, remains unchanged. Section 1. Shadows on the bloodied field. 550 words. You stand on the sun-scorched plains of Cannae in southern Italy, 216 BCE. The air hangs heavy with the metallic stench of blood and the low buzz of flies. 3 days ago, this was the site of Rome's greatest military catastrophe. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general, lured 80,000 Roman legionnaires into a deadly crescent formation. By day's end, 50,000 Romans lay dead, a number exceeding the entire population of Rome itself. Now, as scavengers pick through the carnage, a new horror takes root. Whispers that the slain soldiers refuse to rest. The Battle of Cannae was more than a tactical defeat. It was a spiritual rupture. Rome's legions, pride of the Republic, had been outwitted by a barbarian who dared cross the Alps with war elephants. The consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, led their troops into Hannibal's trap, only to be encircled and slaughtered. Paulus died on the field, his body never recovered. Varro fled, later branded a coward, but the true tragedy unfolded in the aftermath. Roman tradition demanded that soldiers retrieve and bury their dead, ensuring passage to the underworld. At Cannae, there were too few survivors to perform the rites. By nightfall, the first stories emerged. Shepherds near the battlefield reported seeing spectral figures in tattered legion armor, their faces blurred as if seen through smoke. A traveling merchant claimed to hear Latin battle cries echoing after midnight, though no living soul was present. Most chilling were accounts of phantom hands clawing at the earth, as if the dead were trying to dig their own graves. To the Romans, this was no mere superstition. It was a crisis of cosmic order. Without proper burial, the lemures, restless dead, would haunt the living, poisoning crops and cursing families. The Senate, reeling from the loss, faced a dilemma. To send priests to Cannae risked further humiliation. To ignore the omens risked divine wrath. They turned to the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, who decreed a mass parentatio, a ritual to appease the dead. But how does one mourn 50,000 souls? The solution was both pragmatic and macabre. soldiers' families were ordered to burn effigies of their lost loved ones in lieu of bodies, while the state commissioned a black marble altar inscribed with all the names of the dead. It was the first time Rome had ever memorialized common soldiers en masse, a tacit admission that the Republic's survival now depended on the loyalty of ghosts. Yet the rumors persisted. In the countryside, farmers refused to till soil near Cannae, fearing it was cursed by the unburied. Recruits mutinied when assigned to legions linked to the battle, terrified of inheriting the dead's misfortune. Even Hannibal, camped nearby, took note. According to the historian Livy, the Carthaginian general ordered his men to avoid the battlefield after dark, lest they stir spirits even the gods cannot control. But what truly lurked in those blood-soaked fields? Modern archaeologists have found no evidence of mass graves at Cannae, suggesting most bodies were left to rot, a fact that would have horrified the Romans. Psychologists might attribute the sightings to collective trauma, survivors' guilt manifesting as visions of the fallen. Yet in a world where the boundary between the living and the dead was porous, the distinction mattered little. Rome's crisis was not just military or political, but existential. If the Republic could not protect its soldiers in death, how could it command them in life? As the moon rises over Cannae, a cold wind stirs the dry grass. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone signifer's standard clinks faintly, its eagle crest long stripped away. Are these the sighs of the dead, or the shiver of a nation confronting its own mortality? Rituals in the shadow of death. The Senate's effigy-burning ceremonies brought little peace. Grieving families across Rome tossed wax figurines into hearth fires, whispering prayers to Pluto, god of the underworld. But the spectres of Cannae demanded more than symbolic gestures. Desperate, the Pontifex Maximus authorized a secretive nighttime ritual, the Lemuria, an archaic festival where household heads spat black beans into the dark to appease hungry ghosts. Now, scaled to a state level, it became a spectacle of collective guilt. Priests in black robes paced the forum, scattering beans while chanting, "Begone, ancestral spirits, let these offerings bind you to the earth." Yet the dead of Cannae were not ancestors, they were strangers, their names etched coldly on marble. Meanwhile, Hannibal's army camped just 40 miles south, baffled by Rome's paralysis. The Carthaginian general had expected the Republic to collapse after Cannae. Instead, he found himself battling an invisible enemy, fear. His scouts reported Roman peasants abandoning villages near the battlefield, claiming the soil wept blood. Even Hannibal's war elephants grew skittish at dusk, their handlers murmuring of shapeless things moving in the mist. For a man who relied on psychological warfare, the irony was bitter. Rome's superstitions, once a weakness, now shielded it by turning the land itself into a weapon. By 214 BCE, the Senate took drastic measures. They dispatched the famed general Marcus Claudius Marcellus, a man known for both his battlefield ruthlessness and his piety, to reconsecrate Cannae. Marcellus arrived with a cohort of priests, soldiers, and 100 oxen for sacrifice. His orders were twofold: bury any remains and perform a devotio, a ritual in which a commander offered his own life to the gods in exchange for victory. But Marcellus had no intention of dying. Instead, he staged a symbolic burial, interring fragments of armor and shattered swords in a mass grave. Over it, he erected a stone pillar inscribed with a lie. Here rest the brave sons of Rome, honored by their descendants. The propaganda worked, to a point. Veterans of Cannae, now redeployed under Marcellus, found solace in the fiction of closure. But the pillar became a pilgrimage site for the desperate. Mothers rubbed their hands raw on its edges, begging to dream of their lost sons. Soldiers left offerings of wine and honey cakes, hoping to buy the ghost's protection in future battles. Over time, the site morphed into a shrine to Mors Invicta, undefeated death, a deity blending Roman stoicism with the primal terror of the unburied. Rome's military reforms, however, revealed deeper scars. The Senate decreed that all fallen soldiers must henceforth be cremated or buried on the battlefield, their ashes sent home in urns. This logistical nightmare birthed a new class of battlefield libitinari, funeral contractors who followed legions like vultures, charging families for guaranteed retrieval of remains. Grief became a commodity. Yet the reforms also fostered camaraderie. Soldiers now fought, knowing their bodies wouldn't rot under foreign skies. By 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, legionnaires shouted, "For the ghosts of Cannae," as they crushed Hannibal's forces. The ghosts themselves faded from law, but their legacy endured. Roman law began to recognize soldiers' rights to wills and funeral rites, a radical notion in a world where commoners were disposable. The idea of dignitas in morte, dignity in death, seeped into philosophy, influencing later thinkers like Seneca, who wrote, "A man's end is his true measure." Even the Christian martyrs of the imperial era drew unconsciously on Cannae's narrative, the unburied as witnesses to truth. Yet in quiet moments, the old fears resurfaced. During the reign of Augustus, a plague struck Rome. The Sibylline books, ancient prophetic scrolls, were consulted. Their verdict: the gods demanded a posthumous pardon for Varro, the disgraced consul who fled Cannae. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, erected a statue of Varro in the Forum, a hollow gesture to a man long dead. But the plague lifted. Today, Cannae is a footnote in military textbooks, a lesson in encirclement tactics. But stand alone on that quiet Italian plain at dusk, and you might hear the echo of a question. Do the dead care how they're remembered? Or is it the living who need the ritual? The beams, the urns, the lies carved in stone. The divine flow beneath Rome. You are standing in the heart of the Roman Forum, 200 BCE. The air reeks of incense, sweat, and something far less sacred, a faint, persistent stench rising from the grates underfoot. Beneath your sandals lies the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, a marvel of engineering that channeled wastewater from the city's baths, latrines, and slaughterhouses into the Tiber. But this network of tunnels is more than a civic utility. It is a temple. Here, Romans prayed to Clocina, the goddess of sewers, whose cult thrived in the intersection of filth and faith. The Cloaca Maxima began as an open ditch in the 6th century BCE, carved by Etruscan engineers under King Tarquinius Priscus. By the Republican era, it had been vaulted into a subterranean labyrinth, its brick arches echoing with the rush of water and the whispers of worshippers. Cloacina's shrine, a small, silver-plated altar, stood near the forum's entrance, where the sewer's main branch surfaced. Offerings of flowers, coins, and perfumed oil were tossed into the murky flow, a plea to keep the city clean, in both body and soul. But why venerate a goddess of waste? To the Romans, sewers were not just practical, they were profoundly symbolic. Cloacina, likely derived from clor, to purify, embodied the paradox of civilization. Order relied on managing what was foul. Her cult fused practical gratitude with spiritual awe. Without her blessing, the streets would flood with sewage, plagues would erupt, and the social order, quite literally, would crumble into decay. Even the Senate paid homage. Records show funds allocated to maintain her shrine in perpetuity. Cloacina's worship also intersected with Rome's founding myths. According to the poet Ovid, she purified the Sabine women after their abduction by Romulus's men, rinsing away the stain of their forced marriages. Later, she was syncretized with Venus, becoming Venus Cloacina, a goddess of reconciliation who turned moral filth into harmony. This duality fascinated Rome's elites. The statesman Pliny the Elder called her the hidden vein of the city's virtue, while engineers praised her as the silent partner of Rome's expansion. After all, no army can conquer if dysentery strikes first. Yet the rituals surrounding Cloacina were decidedly unglamorous. Each year, on the Festival of Purification, priests in lead-lined gloves lowered bronze effigies of body parts, intestines, bladders, livers, into the sewer's depths. These ex-votos symbolized ailments cured by the goddess's flow. Wealthy matrons donated jewelry, believing Cloacina would flush away their sins. Even the occasional live sacrifice, a rooster or kid, was hurled into the current, though critics like Cato the Elder grumbled that only fools waste good meat on a river of shit. The sewer's role as a confessional fascinates modern historians. Archaeologists have found curse tablets, deficciones, lodged in the cloaca's bricks, invoking Cloacina to wash away enemies. One tablet, now in the Vatican museums, reads, "Just as this waste vanishes, so too may Vitellius's lies rot in the underworld. Cloacina, consume him." For Romans, the sewer was a liminal space, a bridge between the visible and invisible, where secrets and sins could be dissolved. But Cloacina's true power lay in her anonymity. Unlike Jupiter or Mars, she had no grand temple, no festivals with chariot races. Her worshippers were bakers, butchers, and senators alike, united by their dependence on her unseen labour. When the sewer clogged, as it did during the Great Flood of 192 BCE, panic proved her divinity. The floodwaters, polluted with offal and corpses, drowned entire neighbourhoods. Only after the Pontifex Maximus performed a public sacrifice at her shrine did the waters recede, leaving behind a lesson. Even gods of filth demand respect. As you stare into the cloaca's dark maw, a question lingers. Did the Romans worship Cloacina out of reverence, or fear of what might happen if they stopped? The divine flow beneath Rome. You are standing in the heart of the Roman Forum, 200 BCE. The air reeks of incense, sweat, and something far less sacred, a faint, persistent stench rising from the grates underfoot. Beneath your sandals lies the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, a marvel of engineering that channeled wastewater from the city's baths, latrines, and slaughterhouses into the Tiber. But this network of tunnels is more than a civic utility. It is a temple. Here, Romans prayed to Cloacina, the goddess of sewers, whose cult thrived in the intersection of filth and faith. The Cloaca Maxima began as an open ditch in the 6th century BCE, carved by Etruscan engineers under King Tarquinius Priscus. By the Republican era, it had been vaulted into a subterranean labyrinth, its brick arches echoing with the rush of water and the whispers of worshippers. Cloacina's shrine, a small, silver-plated altar, stood near the forum's entrance, where the sewer's main branch surfaced. Offerings of flowers, coins, and perfumed oil were tossed into the murky flow, a plea to keep the city clean in both body and soul. But why venerate a goddess of waste? To the Romans, sewers were not just practical, they were profoundly symbolic. Cloacina, likely derived from clor, to purify, embodied the paradox of civilization. Order relied on managing what was foul. Her cult fused practical gratitude with spiritual awe. Without her blessing, the streets would flood with sewage, plagues would erupt, and the social order, quite literally, would crumble into decay. Even the Senate paid homage. Records show funds allocated to maintain her shrine in perpetuity. Cloacina's worship also intersected with Rome's founding myths. According to the poet Ovid, she purified the Sabine women after their abduction by Romulus's men, rinsing away the stain of their forced marriages. Later, she was syncretized with Venus, becoming Venus Cloacina, a goddess of reconciliation who turned moral filth into harmony. This duality fascinated Rome's elites. The statesman Pliny the Elder called her the hidden vein of the city's virtue, while engineers praised her as the silent partner of Rome's expansion. After all, no army can conquer if dysentery strikes first. Yet the rituals surrounding Cloacina were decidedly unglamorous. Each year, on the Festival of Purification, priests in lead-lined gloves lowered bronze effigies of body parts, intestines, bladders, livers, into the sewer's depths. These ex votos symbolized ailments cured by the goddess's flow. Wealthy matrons donated jewelry, believing Cloacina would flush away their sins. Even the occasional live sacrifice, a rooster or kid, was hurled into the current, though critics like Cato the Elder grumbled that only fools waste good meat on a river of shit. The sewer's role as a confessional fascinates modern historians. Archaeologists have found curse tablets, defictions, lodged in the cloaca's bricks, invoking Cloacina to wash away enemies. One tablet, now in the Vatican museums, reads, "Just as this waste vanishes, so too may Vitellius's lies rot in the underworld. Cloacina, consume him." For Romans, the sewer was a liminal space, a bridge between the visible and invisible, where secrets and sins could be dissolved. But Cloacina's true power lay in her anonymity. Unlike Jupiter or Mars, she had no grand temple, no festivals with chariot races. Her worshippers were bakers, butchers, and senators alike, united by their dependence on her unseen labor. When the sewer clogged, as it did during the Great Flood of 1920 BCE, panic proved her divinity. The floodwaters, polluted with offal and corpses, drowned entire neighborhoods. Only after the Pontifex Maximus performed a public sacrifice at her shrine did the waters recede, leaving behind a lesson. Even gods of filth demand respect. The politics of filth. By the 1st century BCE, the Cloaca Maxima had become a political battleground. Senators vied for the prestigious title of Curator Cloacarum, Keeper of the Sewers, a position that blended civic duty with divine authority. To control the sewers was to control Rome's literal and metaphorical lifeblood, a fact not lost on Julius Caesar. During his rise to power, he funded lavish expansions of the cloaca, even diverting its flow to drain the marshes around Pompey's theatre. Critics accused him of buying the goddess's favor, but the public cheered. Clean streets meant fewer plagues, and Caesar's name became synonymous with both progress and piety. Cloacina's cult, however, faced a crisis during the reign of Emperor Nero. In 64 CE, the Great Fire of Rome reduced much of the city to ash, and the Cloaca Maxima clogged with debris. Nero, ever the showman, seized the opportunity to rebuild Rome in his image, with himself as the new divine engineer. He commissioned a statue of Cloacina recast in his likeness, smirking as she poured sewage from a jug. The insult to tradition was deliberate. Nero's Rome would worship him, not some gutter deity. The statue lasted only weeks before being vandalized, its head found floating in the Tiber. The backlash revealed a deeper truth. Romans tolerated autocrats, but revered their rituals. After Nero's fall, Emperor Vespasian restored Cloacina's shrine, funding it with taxes from public latrines. His famous quip, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't stink, underscored the sewer's role as both utility and symbol. Even waste, Vespasian implied, could serve the state. But Cloacina's most ardent devotees were neither emperors nor engineers. They were Rome's forgotten poor. In the Subura slums, where raw sewage often flooded tenements, residents clung to her as a protector. They scratched her name onto amulets and whispered prayers as they emptied chamber pots into communal drains. To them, the goddess represented hope, that filth could be transformed, that the marginalized might find dignity in the empire's bowels. This duality peaked during the annual Ludi Cloacinae, a festival where priests reenacted the sewer's founding. Actors dressed as Etruscan engineers battled a papier-mâché monster, symbolizing disease, while children tossed barley cakes into grates as offerings. The climax saw a condemned criminal, often a debtor or thief, paraded as the king of filth, ritually purified in a mock baptism of wastewater before being pardoned. The message was clear. Cloacina forgave, but only through submission to Rome's order. Yet the sewers held darker secrets. In 19 CE, the corpse of a Vestal virgin was found in the cloaca, her throat slit. The scandal rocked Rome. Vestals sworn to chastity were considered embodiments of the city's purity. Had she been murdered to pollute the goddess's domain? Or was her death a twisted offering? The incident sparked a senatorial inquiry, but no culprit was found. Instead, the cloaca itself was put on trial. Priests performed a lustration, a purification ritual involving the sacrifice of a white sow, while the sewer's main channels were scrubbed with vinegar and brine. By the 4th century CE, as Christianity supplanted pagan rites, Cloacina's cult faded. The church condemned her as a demon of filth, and her shrine was buried under new basilicas. Yet her legacy persisted. Medieval plumbers inherited the title Cloacari, and modern Rome's sewers still follow the Cloaca Maxima's ancient course. Even Pope Pius V, in 1566, praised the system as a marvel of divine foresight, though he credited God, not Cloacina. Today, engineers marvel at the cloaca's durability, but its true lesson is cultural. Rome thrived not by ignoring its filth, but by ritualizing it, by turning the management of waste into a civic sacrament. In an age of climate crises and crumbling infrastructure, Cloacina's ghost whispers a question. What unseen systems uphold our civilization, and what happens when we stop honoring them? The eternal flow. By the twilight of the Roman Empire, Cloacina's influence had seeped into realms far beyond her murky domain. Her cult's decline under Christianity did not erase her legacy, it reshaped it. Roman jurists, for instance, codified sanitation laws inspired by her rites. The Lex Cloacaria, 1st century CE, mandated that homeowners maintain their sewer connections or face fines, framing civic duty as divine obligation. Physicians like Galen cited the Cloaca Maxima in treatises on public health, arguing that bad air from stagnant sewage caused disease, a theory that persisted into the 19th century as miasma theory. Even the Christian theologian Augustine grudgingly acknowledged Cloacina, comparing her purifying flow to baptism. As water cleanses the body, so Christ's grace cleanses the soul. But Cloacina's most enduring impact lay in Rome's relationship with labour. The Cloacari, the enslaved workers who maintained the sewers, were both reviled and revered. Pliny the Elder called them the unsung priests of civilization. Yet they lived in squalor, their lifespans shortened by methane fumes and collapsing tunnels. In 73 BCE, a Cloacarius named Aulus famously led a revolt, chaining himself inside the cloaca and threatening to flood the forum unless his crew was freed. The Senate, terrified of a literal shitstorm, negotiated. Aulus won his freedom, but his story was erased from official records, preserved only in graffiti near the Temple of Vesta. Aulus defied the gods, and the gods blinked. The sewer's role as a societal mirror persisted into the Christian era. When Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, he ordered the cloaca cleansed of pagan symbols. Yet workers left Cloacina's altar intact, disguising it as a memorial to unknown martyrs. pilgrims continued to toss coins into the grate, now interpreted as alms for the poor. The goddess's duality, both sacred and profane, proved irrepressible. Modern cities unknowingly echo Cloacina's paradox. Paris's 19th century sewers, designed by Eugène Belgrand, doubled as tourist attractions, their arches inscribed with quotes from Hugo's Les Misérables. London's Great Stink of 1858 prompted Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system, hailed as a temple to public health. Today, Tokyo's G-Cans project, a vast underground drainage network, is dubbed the Cathedral of Flood Prevention. Each marvel channels the same blend of practicality and awe that defined Cloacina's cult. Yet the darker parallels remain. In developing nations, manual scavengers, often from marginalized castes, still descend into sewers, much like Rome's cloacari, facing death from toxins and neglect. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic rekindled debates about sanitation workers as essential yet expendable. Cloacina's ghost lingers in these contradictions, asking, who bears the cost of collective purity? Archaeologists in 2021 discovered a 2nd century artifact. CE curse tablet in the Cloaca Maxima, its message eerily modern. As this waste rots, so rot the lives of those who exploit the humble. The tablet, now in Rome's Museo Nazionale, challenges the notion of progress. Have we evolved, or simply rebranded ancient hierarchies? As Vesuvius buried Pompeii, Herculaneum and Stabiae in 79 CE, the Cloaca Maxima endured. Earthquakes, invasions and neglect cracked its bricks, but its core function survived. Today, rainwater still courses through its original Etruscan channels, mingling with the ghosts of offerings, coins, prayers, and the hopes of those who believed filth could be sacred. The next time you flush a toilet or walk past a storm drain, pause. Cloacina's lesson is not about sewers, but about the stories we tell to endure the unspeakable. Civilization, she whispers, is not built on ideals alone. It is carved into the earth, stone by stone, to carry away what we fear to face. The ritual of the right foot first, 550 words. The Third Samnite War, 298 to 290 BCE, had dragged on for years, a grinding conflict over control of central Italy. On a mist-shrouded morning near the Apennine Mountains, the Roman consul Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus stood in his tent, staring at his sandals. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for them. To an outsider, this might seem absurd, a seasoned commander hesitating over footwear. But to Scipio, the order in which he fastened his sandals meant the difference between victory and ruin. Roman soldiers believed fervently in omens militaris, the unwritten rules governing battlefield luck. Among these was the doctrine of the caliga dextra, the ritual of lacing the right sandal first. The left foot, associated with the sinister, a word meaning both left and ill-omened in Latin, was thought to attract misfortune if given primacy. Soldiers whispered tales of comrades who'd ignored the practice, only to slip in battle, break ankles or worse. Even centurions enforced the ritual, inspecting recruits' feet before marches. Scipio, however, was not a superstitious man. A pragmatist hardened by decades of war, he saw the Samnite conflict as a test of discipline, not divine favour. But his troops were restless. The Samnites, famed for their guerrilla tactics, had ambushed Roman supply lines, and morale was fraying. That morning, as Scipio prepared for a critical engagement, his aide, a young tribune named Marcus, had nervously reminded him of the sandal custom. "The men are watching, Consul," Marcus muttered. "They say the left foot offends Juno." Juno, goddess of state and protector of Rome, was said to despise laxity in ritual. Yet Scipio chafed at the idea of catering to old women's tales. As he sat on his campaign stool, He deliberately grasped his left sandal, its leather stiff from mountain dew. The act felt trivial, almost childish. But as he threaded the straps, a murmur rippled through the camp. Soldiers exchanging glances, centurions stiffening, a silent judgment. The Samnites, meanwhile, were masters of psychological warfare. Their spies had infiltrated Roman camps, spreading rumors of cursed battlefields and poisoned springs. When scouts reported Scipio's defiance of the sandal ritual, the Samnite general Gellius Egnatius seized the opportunity. At dawn, as the Romans formed ranks, Egnatius ordered his men to bang shields and chant, "Sinister payday, Roma cadet! Left foot first, Rome falls!" The taunt hit its mark. Roman lines wavered, soldiers glancing at their own feet as if suddenly aware of their vulnerability. Scipio, mounted on his horse, roared orders to advance, but the damage was done. The legions, usually a machine of synchronized movement, stumbled in their resolve. As they descended into the valley, the Samnites unleashed their signature weapon, the Legio Linteata, a corps of soldiers clad in linen armor dyed crimson, designed to mimic the blood-soaked dead. Panic surged through the Roman ranks. Men tripped over rocks, their focus fractured by superstition and spectacle. By midday, the battle hung in the balance. Scipio's forces held the high ground, but their cohesion was crumbling. The consul, his left sandal now caked in mud, realized the irony. His dismissal of ritual had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The soldiers' belief in the omen, not the omen itself, was undoing them. In a desperate gamble, he dismounted, drew his sword, and did the unthinkable. He sliced the straps of his left sandal, letting it fall barefoot into the muck. "Juno watches the brave, not their feet," he bellowed. The act, both theatrical and visceral, stunned the legions into focus. Renewed, they pushed forward, driving the Samnites back. Yet the victory was Pyrrhic. Hundreds lay dead, and Scipio's defiance had sown discord. That night, around campfires, soldiers debated whether the consul's barefoot bravado had saved them, or invited deeper wrath from the gods. As the moon rose, Scipio stared at his discarded sandal. A question gnawed at him. Can an empire conquer the world if its soldiers fear their own feet? The barefoot gamble. The morning after the battle, the Roman camp buzzed with uneasy whispers. Though Scipio's legions had repelled the Samnites, the cost had been steep. Hundreds lay dead, their bodies stripped of armor by scavengers. Worse, the soldiers' superstitions festered like wounds. Men clustered around campfires, recounting nightmares of limping phantoms and cursed sandals. A rumor spread that Juno herself had sent a she-wolf to gnaw at the left feet of the slain, a divine rebuke for Scipio's defiance. The consul knew his authority teetered on myth as much as victory. Roman discipline relied on mos maiorum, ancestral customs, and his barefoot stunt had breached tradition. To quell dissent, he summoned the legion's aquilifer, the eagle-bearer, and staged a public ritual. Before the ranks, he knelt and laced his right sandal first, theatrically mimicking the proper rite. "Let no man say I scorn the gods," he declared. Privately, he seethed. "Superstition is a crutch for weak minds," he confided to Marcus, his aide. "But even crutches have uses." The Samnites, however, smelled blood. Gellius Egnatius, their general, dispatched spies to infiltrate Roman supply lines. These agents posed as traders, selling amulets blessed by Juno to protect against left-foot curses. Legionnaires bartered rations for the trinkets, hiding them under their breastplates. When Scipio discovered the trade, he ordered a decimation, 1 in 10 offenders flogged. The punishment backfired. Soldiers grumbled that their commander valued pride over their souls. Desperate, Scipio turned to Rome's most cynical tool, propaganda. He commissioned a bard to compose a ballad, the Song of the Barefoot Consul, glorifying his defiance as a heroic snub to Samnite sorcery. The lyrics claim Juno had rewarded his boldness with victory, her sacred geese hissing approval as he fought. Camp followers sang it nightly, and slowly the narrative shifted. Scipio's recklessness became legend, a calculated gamble blessed by the gods. But the Samnites were not idle. Ignatius devised a new tactic, the cursus sinister, a mock race where Samnite soldiers hopped on their left feet, jeering at Roman sentries. "Run home to your mothers, left-foot lovers," they taunted. The psychological warfare gnawed at Roman resolve. During a midnight patrol, a skittish legionnaire mistook a badger for a ghost and sparked a panicked retreat. Scipio, realizing morale could crumble before the next battle, took drastic action. He ordered the army's cobblers to alter every left sandal. The straps were shortened, forcing soldiers to tighten them after the right foot, a physical reminder of ritual order. "Let your hands teach your hearts," he proclaimed. The move was ingenious. It paid lip service to tradition while asserting control. Even skeptics relished the comfort of routine. Yet the true test came at the Battle of Camerinum. As dawn broke, Scipio's troops faced a Samnite force entrenched on a rocky slope. Before the charge, the consul staged a final spectacle. He mounted a podium, raised his left sandal, and hacked its straps with a sword. "Today, we fight not with feet, but with fury." The soldiers roared, their fear drowned in adrenaline. The battle was brutal. The Samnites rained javelins and rolled boulders, but the Romans, driven by Scipio's blend of pragmatism and pageantry, pressed forward. When Ignatius's lines broke, the Romans chased them into a ravine, slaughtering thousands. Victory was total, but so was its irony. As scavengers looted the field, they found dead Samnites clutching Juno amulets, stripped from Roman corpses. That night, Scipio sat in his tent, studying a captured Samnite standard. Marcus entered, bearing news. The Senate had praised the victory, but demanded Scipio honor tradition in future campaigns. The consul smirked. "Tradition is a sword," he said, "and I wield it as I please." Yet as he drifted to sleep, a question plagued him. Had he mastered superstition, or become its pawn? The price of pragmatism. The Third Samnite War ended not with a climactic battle, but with a treaty signed in shadow. After Camerinum, the Samnites retreated to their mountain strongholds, their resolve fractured, but their spirit unbroken. Scipio, hailed as Victor Sinistri, conqueror of the left, by the Senate, returned to Rome for a triumph. Yet as his chariot rolled through the forum, crowds cheered not for his tactics, but for the myth he'd crafted. Soldiers waved altered sandals like talismans, and street vendors sold miniature left-foot amulets blessed by Juno herself. Scipio's pragmatism had won the war, but his victory belonged to the gods. The consul's final campaign revealed the cost of his gamble. In 290 BCE, the Senate tasked him with quelling a rebellion in Etruria. This time, Scipio adhered strictly to tradition, lacing his right sandal first, consulting augurs, even sacrificing a white bull to Mars. But the legionnaires, now steeped in his earlier theatrics, grew restless. "Where is the barefoot consul?" they muttered. Discipline frayed, and the campaign stalled. Scipio, trapped between his disdain for ritual and the legend he'd created, wrote to the Senate, "The soldier's heart demands both sword and spectacle. I gave them one. The gods claim the other." The war's true resolution came not on the battlefield, but in the Collegium Augurum. Rome's priests decreed a new doctrine. Henceforth, military rituals would be standardized, their symbolism codified in scrolls stored in the Temple of Jupiter. The Caliga Dextra rite became enshrined as law, but with a caveat: any deviation required Senate approval. Superstition, once a folk belief, was now bureaucracy. Scipio retired to his villa in Campania, where he reportedly burned his left sandal in a private ritual. When asked by historians about the war, he quipped, "I fought men, not phantoms." Yet his legacy proved him wrong. Future generals, from Fabius Maximus to Julius Caesar, studied his campaigns not for tactics, but for lessons in manipulating faith. The sandal strap became a metaphor for leadership. Tighten tradition too much, and you strangle innovation. Loosen it, and you risk chaos. The Samnites, absorbed into Rome's growing hegemony, carried their own scars. Oral histories tell of mothers whispering to children, "Beware the Romans, they conquer even their own gods." Over centuries, Samnite traditions blended with Roman ones, their fear of the left foot evolving into folklore about Strega, witches who cursed thresholds by entering left foot first. Thus, a general's defiance birthed a cultural ghost that haunted Italy for millennia. Modern historians debate Scipio's choices. Was he a visionary who exposed the flimsiness of superstition, or a cynic who weaponized it? The answer lies in Rome's trajectory. By institutionalizing ritual, the Republic stabilized its military culture, enabling its rise. Yet it also sowed the seeds of future fanaticism, seen in emperors like Caligula, who staged elaborate omens to mask incompetence. Today, the Third Samnite War is a footnote, but its paradox endures. In 2019, archaeologists unearthed a Samnite tomb near Benevento containing a Roman sandal, its left strap deliberately cut. Curse tablets nearby invoked Juno Lupa, Juno the she-wolf, to devour the feet of the arrogant. The find suggests that, even in defeat, the Samnites understood the power of symbols. As you drift into sleep, consider this. Every culture has its left foot, a taboo, a ritual, a silent agreement to pretend. We dismiss them as primitive, yet we still knock on wood, avoid black cats, or wear lucky shoes to job interviews. Scipio's story asks us, are these rituals chains or compasses? And what happens when a society forgets how to tell the difference? The loaf that spoke you are in Pompeii, 62 CE, 17 years before Vesuvius's wrath. The morning sun slants through the open roof of a bakery on Via di Nola, illuminating flour-dusted air. The rhythmic clatter of millstones grinds in the background, powered by donkeys plodding in endless circles. Here, bread is more than sustenance. It is scripture. The baker, a stout man named Marcus Gabius Apicius, kneads dough with hands calloused from decades of work. But he is no ordinary artisan. He is a pista sacer, a baker priest, trained to read the cracks and molds of loaves as messages from the gods. In Pompeii, bread was life. The city's 30-odd bakeries supplied panis quadratus, the wheel-shaped loaves scored into 8 wedges, to rich and poor alike. Yet in Apicius's oven, baking intertwined with devotion. Each loaf bore a stamp, Sacra Vien, marking it as an offering to Ceres, goddess of grain. As the bread baked, Apicius watched for omens. A split crust might signal Fortuna's favour, a misshapen loaf, Jupiter's displeasure. But the most potent signs lay in mould. When blue-green blooms appeared, Apicius would murmur incantations, believing the rot carried whispers from the underworld. The practice had roots in the Collegium Pistorum, Pompeii's guild of bakers, which doubled as a religious order. Members studied the Libri Panifici, scrolls detailing how to interpret bread auguries, a mould pattern resembling a vine. Bacchus demanded more wine at festivals. Black spots clustered like stars. Navigators should postpone voyages. The guild's authority was such that even politicians sought their counsel. After the earthquake of 62 CE, a catastrophe that shattered temples and homes, the city's magistrates ordered Apicius to bake a loaf of reconciliation for Neptune. The resulting bread, studded with honey and poppy seeds, was deemed auspicious when it baked evenly. Reconstruction began, and the baker's influence grew. But on a sweltering morning in 79 CE, Apicius pulled a loaf from his oven that defied interpretation. The crust had split into a jagged fissure, its interior streaked with lurid orange mould. The Librae Panifici called such growths fungus phlegethontis, mould of the river of fire, a rare omen linked to Vulcan, god of volcanoes. Apicius had seen it only once before, days after the earthquake. Now it reappeared as tremors shuddered underfoot. Springs near Vesuvius had dried up that week, and dogs howled at night. The baker priest knew the signs. He rushed to the Duumviri, Pompeii's chief magistrates, clutching the mould-riddled loaf. "Vulcan stirs," he warned. "The mountain breathes poison. We must evacuate." The magistrates scoffed. Pompeii had thrived since the earthquake. Vineyards and villas sprawled up Vesuvius's slopes. To flee now would panic the populace and disrupt the grain supply. "Superstition," one sneered, tossing the loaf into the street. A stray dog sniffed it, whined, and slunk away. Yet Apicius's dread deepened. That afternoon, he climbed to the temple of Isis, where his daughter served as a priestess. Together, they burned myrrh and pressed the mould into wax tablets, sealing it with a prayer to Hecate, guardian of thresholds. "The gods speak through rot," his daughter said, her voice trembling. "But who listens to bakers?" As dusk fell, Apicius returned to his bakery. The millstones lay still, the donkeys uneasy. He lit a lamp and opened the Libri Panifici to a page he'd never noticed before. A faded illustration showed a mountain vomiting fire, its slopes littered with broken bread. Beneath it, a warning. When the divine flame consumes the grain, the gates of Orcus open. Outside, the earth trembled again. Ash drifted on the wind like black snow. The omen ignored. 550 words. The days following Apicius's warning unfolded in a tense limbo. The magistrates dismissed the mould-riddled loaf as the ravings of a flower-addled mind, but whispers slithered through Pompeii's streets. Wealthy merchants who had once clamoured for Apicius's auspicious bread now avoided his bakery. Only the poor still came, drawn by discounted loaves and the baker's grim mutterings. "The mountain's breath is poison. Leave while you can." Meanwhile, the Collegium Pistorum convened in secret. Guild elders gathered in the temple of Vespasian, debating whether to endorse Apicius's prophecy. The Libri Panifici was clear. Fungus phlegethontis signalled fire from the gods. Yet to publicly declare an evacuation risked accusations of sedition. The guild's leader, a stooped man named Decimus, argued for caution. "We are bakers, not augurs. Let the magistrates answer to Vulcan." But Apicius, fueled by desperation, stole into the temple at dawn and scraped the mould from his cursed loaf onto the altar. By sunrise, the spores had spread across the stone like lichen, a silent rebuke to doubters. The earth's tremors grew violent. On the Via dell'Abbondanza, a crack split the road, swallowing a mule cart whole. Wells bubbled with sulphur, and birds fled the city in shrieking flocks. Still, the magistrates clung to denial. They commissioned a grand feast in the forum, roasting oxen and scattering petals to appease the gods. Apicius, invited as a gesture of hollow conciliation, arrived clutching a fresh loaf, this one streaked with black mould. He hurled it onto the magistrate's table, shouting, "Eat your lies and choke on them." Guards dragged him away, but not before the crowd saw the bread ooze a viscous, tar-like sludge. That night, Pompeii's slaves and freedmen gathered at the bakery. Apicius's daughter, her Isis priestess robes stained with ash, distributed loaves stamped with a single word: Ephigite, flee. Many heeded the call, bundling belongings and vanishing into the countryside. Others stayed, bound by debt or disbelief. Among them was Felix, a fish sauce merchant who scoffed, "I've survived earthquakes and fires. A baker's mold won't scare me." On August 24th, 79 CE, the sky darkened at noon. Vesuvius roared to life, hurling a column of pumice and ash 9 miles high. Apicius, barred from his bakery after the feast incident, stood in the temple of Isis, watching the mountain bleed fire. His daughter pressed a mold-stamped loaf into his hands, a final offering to the gods. "The Libri was right," she said, "but so were you." As pyroclastic surges raced toward the city, the baker priest did something historians still debate. He sprinted to his oven, now cold and abandoned, and began baking one last loaf. Was it a futile prayer, a defiant act of routine, or a message to the future? The dough, mixed with well water and millet, never rose. Apicius's body was found centuries later, curled beside the oven, a charred loaf clutched to his chest. The magistrates perished in their villas, their feasting tables buried under 20 feet of ash. Felix, the skeptic, died in his shop, his amphorae of garum shattered by falling stones. But those who fled, the poor, the slaves, the bakers, carried fragments of the prophecy. In Stabii, a refugee camp outside the death zone, survivors baked makeshift loaves over campfires, their crusts split like the earth itself. Modern excavations tell the rest. The bakery of Apicius is now a tourist site, its millstones frozen mid-grind. In 2020, scientists analyzing the black mold on his final loaf identified Streptomyces, a bacterium that thrives in volcanic soil. To the Romans, it was a divine warning. To us, it's a microbial timestamp of doom. Yet the tragedy holds a quieter lesson. Pompeii's fall was not just a geological inevitability, but a failure to heed those who read the world differently: the bakers, the slaves, the women whispering at the margins. What might have been saved if their voices had outweighed the magistrates' pride? In the weeks following Vesuvius's cataclysm, survivors huddled in refugee camps across the Bay of Naples. The baker priests who had fled Pompeii carried with them fragments of the Libri Panificii, salvaged from collapsing temples. At night, by flickering campfires, they baked coarse loaves from scavenged grain, their crusts studded with wild herbs. These loaves bore no stamps, no omens, only survival. Yet the act of baking itself became a ritual of defiance. "We are still here," their kneading hands seemed to say. The gods did not take everything. The Roman state, however, sought to erase the disaster's prophetic sting. Emperor Titus, eager to downplay divine wrath, declared the eruption a natural misfortune, not a punishment. Pompeii's ruins were abandoned, its name struck from official maps. The omen ignored, 550 words. The days following Apicius's warning unfolded in a tense limbo. The magistrates dismissed the mold-riddled loaf as the ravings of a flower-addled mind, but whispers slithered through Pompeii's streets. Wealthy merchants, who had once clamoured for Apicius's auspicious bread, now avoided his bakery. Only the poor still came, drawn by discounted loaves and the baker's grim mutterings. "The mountain's breath is poison. Leave while you can." Meanwhile, the Collegium Pistorum convened in secret. Guild elders gathered in the temple of Vespasian, debating whether to endorse Apicius's prophecy. The Libri Panificii was clear. Fungus Phlegethontis signalled fire from the gods. Yet to publicly declare an evacuation risked accusations of sedition. The guild's leader, a stooped man named Decimus, argued for caution. "We are bakers, not augurs. Let the magistrates answer to Vulcan." But Apicius, fueled by desperation, stole into the temple at dawn and scraped the mold from his cursed loaf onto the altar. By sunrise, the spores had spread across the stone like lichen, a silent rebuke to doubters. The earth's tremors grew violent. On the Via dell'Abbondanza, a crack split the road, swallowing a mule cart whole. Wells bubbled with sulphur, and birds fled the city in shrieking flocks. Still, the magistrates clung to denial. They commissioned a grand feast in the forum, roasting oxen and scattering petals to appease the gods. Apicius, invited as a gesture of hollow conciliation, arrived clutching a fresh loaf, this one streaked with black mold. He hurled it onto the magistrate's table, shouting, "Eat your lies and choke on them." Guards dragged him away, but not before the crowd saw the bread ooze a viscous, tar-like sludge. That night, Pompey's slaves and freedmen gathered at the bakery. Apicius's daughter, her Isis priestess robes stained with ash, distributed loaves stamped with a single word: Ephigite, flee. Many heeded the call, bundling belongings and vanishing into the countryside. Others stayed, bound by debt or disbelief. Among them was Felix, a fish sauce merchant who scoffed, "I've survived earthquakes and fires. A baker's mold won't scare me." On August 24th, 79 CE, the sky darkened at noon. Vesuvius roared to life, hurling a column of pumice and ash 9 miles high. Apicius, barred from his bakery after the feast incident, stood in the temple of Isis, watching the mountain bleed fire. His daughter pressed a mold-stamped loaf into his hands, a final offering to the gods. "The Libri was right," she said, "but so were you." As pyroclastic surges raced toward the city, the baker priest did something historians still debate. He sprinted to his oven, now cold and abandoned, and began baking one last loaf. Was it a futile prayer? A defiant act of routine? Or a message to the future? The dough, mixed with well water and millet, never rose. Apicius's body was found centuries later, curled beside the oven, a charred loaf clutched to his chest. The magistrates perished in their villas, their feasting tables buried under 20 feet of ash. Felix, the skeptic, died in his shop, his amphorae of garum shattered by falling stones. But those who fled, the poor, the slaves, the bakers, carried fragments of the prophecy. In Stabiae, a refugee camp outside the death zone, survivors baked makeshift loaves over campfires, their crusts split like the earth itself. Modern excavations tell the rest. The bakery of Apicius is now a tourist site, its millstones frozen mid-grind. In 2020, scientists analyzing the black mold on his final loaf identified Streptomyces, a bacterium that thrives in volcanic soil. To the Romans, it was a divine warning. To us, it's a microbial timestamp of doom. Yet the tragedy holds a quieter lesson. Pompey's fall was not just a geological inevitability, but a failure to heed those who read the world differently. The bakers, the slaves, the women whispering at the margins. What might have been saved if their voices had outweighed the magistrates' pride? In the weeks following Vesuvius's cataclysm, survivors huddled in refugee camps across the Bay of Naples. The baker priests who had fled Pompeii carried with them fragments of the Libri Panifici, salvaged from collapsing temples. At night, by flickering campfires, they baked coarse loaves from scavenged grain, their crusts studded with wild herbs. These loaves bore no stamps, no omens, only survival. Yet the act of baking itself became a ritual of defiance. "We are still here," their kneading hands seemed to say. The gods did not take everything. The Roman state, however, sought to erase the disaster's prophetic sting. Emperor Titus, eager to downplay divine wrath, declared the eruption a natural misfortune, not a punishment. Pompeii's ruins were abandoned, its name struck from official maps. Blood and barley. You are in the Sabine Hills, 150 BCE, At dawn, on the first day of the Pax Cereris, the festival of Ceres, the air hums with the scent of crushed barley and damp earth. A farm wife named Licinia stands at the edge of a wheat field, her bare feet sinking into the soil. In her hands, she cradles a clay jar filled with cloth strips soaked in her menstrual blood. To modern eyes, this is private waste. To Licinia, it is sacred power. Today, she will bury the jar at the field's boundary, a ritual to bless the harvest. But if the blood spills, the crops will blight. If it remains sealed, the grain will swell. Such is the fragile calculus of rural Roman life. Menstrual blood, or materna sanguis, mother's blood, was both revered and feared in agrarian communities. Rural women believed it held the dual essence of fertility and decay, a force capable of nourishing crops or cursing them to rot. Pliny the Elder, ever the cataloguer of Roman quirks, wrote that menstrual blood could sour wine, dull blades, and kill insect pests, but also invigorate barren fields if applied under a waning moon. These taboos were not mere folklore. They shaped the agricultural calendar. Planting, harvesting, and even irrigation were timed around cycles of bleeding, with women's bodies synchronized to the rhythms of the land. The Pax Cereris was one of few festivals where women led public rites. Men were barred from the fields during the 3-day ceremony, while farm wives like Licinia performed rituals passed down through generations. They mixed menstrual blood with milk and honey, offering it to Ceres in clay pots. They danced counterclockwise around stone markers, chanting hymns to appease the lemures, spirits of the dead who craved the blood's vitality. The festival's climax saw women anointing plowshares with the mixture, a symbolic marriage of human and earth fertility. But Licinia's world teetered on drought. For 2 summers, rains had failed. The Tiber ran shallow, and wheat stalks withered before bearing grain. Desperate, the village elders debated violating taboo. Could menstrual blood, typically buried to nourish the soil, instead be offered directly to the gods as a sacrifice? Licinia's mother, an elder priestess, resisted. "The blood is life, not barter," she warned. "To pour it out is to beg, not bless." Yet hunger eroded tradition. The crisis deepened when a young widow, Aelia, defied the old ways. Secretly, she poured her menstrual blood into a dried-up well, hoping to awaken its waters. Within days, the well bubbled faintly, but the village erupted in panic. Crops near the well yellowed, and a child fell ill with fever. The elders accused Aelia of polluting the genius loci, the land's protective spirit. She was fined a month's grain and forbidden from rituals. But the incident haunted Licinia. What if Aelia was right? What if the old rites were too timid for such desperate times? As the next Pax Cereris approached, tensions split the village. Licinia's mother insisted on tradition. Bury the blood, trust Ceres. Others whispered of Aelia's defiance, of blood as a key to unlock the skies. Licinia's own cycle began the night before the festival, a sign the gods still listened. But as she prepared her jar, she hesitated. The soil cracked underfoot, and the wind carried the stench of distant wildfires. In Rome, such dilemmas were theoretical. Urban elites mocked rural blood rites as backward, trusting instead in aqueducts and imported Egyptian grain. But here, in the brittle hills, survival hinged on unspoken pacts between women, earth, and the divine. To discard ritual was to risk chaos. To cling to it was to court starvation. Licinia knelt, jar in hand, and scraped at the parched soil. The first raven of morning cawed overhead. Somewhere, a dog howled. She wondered, was her blood a gift or a curse? And if the gods no longer answered, did that make her the heretic or them? The Pact of Thorns and Blood, 550 words. Licinia found Aelia at dusk, gathering bitter herbs by a dried-up stream. The widow's hands were raw from scrubbing wool, her tunic stained with soot. "Your mother thinks I'm cursed," Aelia said without turning. "Why risk her wrath?" Licinia hesitated, then held out her clay jar. Inside, her menstrual blood mingled with honey and vervain, an offering not of supplication, but defiance. "The old rites won't end this drought," she said, "but maybe your way can." Their alliance began in secrecy. Under a moonless sky, they crept to the blighted well where Aelia had poured her blood months prior. Licinia's hands shook as she unstoppered the jar. "Ceres taught us to bury it," she whispered, "but Ceres isn't listening." Together, they poured the mixture into the well, then dropped in a lock of Aelia's hair and a handful of barley seeds, a plea to the genius loci for renewal. The act violated every taboo. Menstrual blood exposed to open air, offered not as nourishment, but demand. For days, nothing changed. Then, on the Ides of Quintilis, a thunderhead gathered over the Sabine hills. The village elders, led by Licinia's mother, prepared a traditional sacrifice, a pregnant ewe, its entrails red for omens. But as the knife fell, lightning split the sky. Rain lashed the fields, pooling in the cursed well. By dawn, barley sprouts pushed through the cracked soil around it. The elders declared it a miracle of Ceres. Licinia knew better. The blighted crops near the well now grew twisted but alive, their stalks streaked with red veins. Aelia's son, the boy who'd fallen ill, recovered overnight, his fever broken. Yet when villagers drank the well's water, they spat it out, metallic, coppery, wrong. Rumours spread of a blood spring, and Roman officials from nearby Reate arrived to investigate. The quaestor, a humorless man named Drusus, inspected the well with a diviner's rod. "This is no miracle," he sneered. "It's pollution. The water reeks of female vice." The accusation carried legal weight. Roman law forbade unnatural acts that corrupted public resources. Aelia was arrested, her son taken to the temple of Asclepius for purification. Licinia, protected by her mother's status, watched in silence as Drusus ordered the well sealed with stone. That night, Licinia's mother confronted her in the granary. "You think I don't know what you did?" she hissed. "You've turned our blood into a weapon. Now Rome will brand us witches." She thrust a scroll into Licinia's hands, an edict from the Senate banning unlicensed fertility rites in drought-stricken regions. The penalty was enslavement. But Licinia had tasted power. She stole into the temple storeroom, where Aelia's blood-stained jar sat as evidence. With a bronze stylus, she etched a plea into the clay. "Mater Ceres, accipe sanguinum nostrum." "Mother Ceres, accept our blood." Then she hurled it against the statue of Ceres, shattering both jar and silence. The next morning, the sealed well overflowed, its water clear and sweet. The red-veined barley ripened overnight, its grains plump as olives. Drusus, fearing divine retribution, fled to Reate. Aelia was released. Her son returned unharmed. The elders, bewildered, declared the miracle a sign of Ceres' forgiveness. Only Licinia and Aelia knew the truth. They had not placated the gods. They had bargained with them. Yet the victory was fragile. The red barley, though fertile, could not be milled. Its grains bled a rust-coloured sap when crushed, staining bread the colour of dried blood. Farmers refused to eat it, feeding it instead to livestock. When Licinia's mother baked a loaf as a test, dogs howled at the oven. The village teetered between gratitude and terror. As the harvest moon rose, Licinia and Aelia met again at the well. "We broke one chain," Aelia said, "but forged another." Licinia nodded, staring at the red barley field. Somewhere, beyond the hills, Rome's legions marched. The Republic tolerated rural quirks, not challenges to its order. Their defiance had brought rain, but at what cost? The harvest of defiance. The red barley fields shimmered like a wound under the autumn sun. Licinia stood at the edge of the crop, a sickle in hand, as Roman soldiers marched into the village. Drusus had returned, not with a questor's scroll, but with a century of legionnaires. Their orders were clear: burn the blighted fields and arrest the polluters. Licinia's mother met them at the gates, her voice steady. This harvest is sacred to Ceres. To destroy it is sacrilege. Drusus laughed. Ceres favors Rome, not peasant witchcraft. That night, the farm wives gathered in the temple storeroom. Aelia, her face gaunt from fasting, ground red barley into a coarse flour. The grain resists fire, she said, but it fears nothing else. Licinia stirred the powder into wine, creating a viscous paste that reeked of iron. The women smeared it on arrowheads and scythes, their hands stained crimson. They knew the odds, 30 women against 100 soldiers. But the barley had whispered a secret. We are not food, we are fury. At dawn, the legionnaires torched the fields. Flames licked the stalks, but instead of blackening, they sang. A high, keening wail tore from the barley, echoing across the hills. Horses reared, throwing riders. Soldiers clutched their ears, blood trickling from nostrils. Licinia's mother, standing at the field's heart, raised her arms and chanted the Pax Sereris hymns backward, a curse masquerading as prayer. The flames turned blue, then vanished, leaving the barley unburnt. Drusus, enraged, ordered a charge, but the women were ready. They loosed arrows tipped with red paste, and where the barbs struck, madness followed. Legionnaires hacked at phantoms, tore off helmets, and fled into the hills. Aelia led a group to the sealed well, prying it open with crowbars. "Drink," she shouted, dousing soldiers with water that smelled of rust and rosemary. Those who tasted it dropped their swords, weeping for mothers they'd forgotten. By midday, the legionnaires retreated, dragging Drusus, now babbling in tongues, behind them. The village was spared, but the victory reeked of ash and delirium. Licinia's mother collapsed at the field's edge, her lungs seared by smoke and incantations. With her last breath, she pressed a jar of menstrual blood into Licinia's hands. "Bury it," she gasped, "but let the earth remember." The red barley, its purpose spent, withered overnight. The well's water cleared, and the soil returned to dusty brown. Rome, eager to erase the humiliation, erased the village from tax rolls, leaving it to starve. Yet the farm wives adapted. They sold charmed barley to passing traders, spun tales of Ceres' wrath, and sent their daughters to marry into distant tribes, carrying seeds and secrets. Aelia vanished into the hills, her son at her side. Some said she founded a coven, others that she died in a landslide. Licinia remained, tending the temple until her hair turned white. When asked about the red harvest, she smiled. The gods are fickle, but the earth never forgets. Centuries later, archaeologists excavating the Sabine hills found a child's grave. Nestled beside the bones was a clay jar, its interior stained with traces of menstrual blood and barley husks. Carbon dating placed it around 150 BCE, the year the drought broke. Modern labs identified the residue as Claviceps purpurea, a fungus causing ergot, a toxin that induces hallucinations. To the Romans, it was magic. To us, it's biology. Yet the grave's epitaph, etched in Sabine dialect, defies both. Chic site vis, est sanguis, matris. Here lies the mother's blood. Final reflection. The farmwives' defiance was not a rebellion against Rome, but a reclamation of voice. Their story whispers a truth. Marginalized communities have always wielded knowledge as both shield and sword. even when history names it superstition. In our age of climate crisis and cultural erasure, their legacy asks, what wisdom do we dismiss as primitive? And what price will we pay for that arrogance? The boy who lived too long, infant omens and the evil eye, the seventh son, Rome, 63 BCE. In the shadow of the Capitoline Hill, a senator's villa buzzes with uneasy whispers. A newborn wails in the arms of his wet nurse, his tiny fist clutching a bulla, a golden amulet meant to ward off the evil eye. But this child, Tertius Aemilius Scaurus, needs more than charms. He is the seventh son born to his mother, all previous 6 having perished in infancy. To the household slaves, this makes him cursed. To his father, Senator Lucius Scaurus, it makes him an omen. Roman families dreaded such children. Surviving against cosmic odds marked a child as either divinely favored or a vessel for invidia, the evil eye. The Stoic philosopher Seneca later wrote, "A child who cheats death invites death's gaze upon all." Laws even permitted the paterfamilias to disown or expose infants deemed ill-omened. But Tertius's mother, Cornelia, defied tradition. She smuggled him to the temple of Venus Libitina, goddess of funerals, and paid the priestess to falsify his death record. For 3 years, she raised him in secret among the temple's enslaved weavers, dyeing his hair black to mask its telltale red curls. The ruse collapsed on Tertius's 3rd birthday. During the lustratio purification ritual, a visiting augur spotted the boy playing with a clay figurine of Orcus, god of the underworld. The priest recoiled, declaring, "This one bears death's fingerprints." Panic spread. Senator Scaurus, torn between love for his son and fear of scandal, consulted the Libri Fatales, Rome's cryptic books of destiny. The passage he read chilled him. "A 7th son who lives shall see 7 reigns, and in the 7th bring ruin." But what did it mean? Rome had no emperors yet. It was a republic governed by consuls. The senator's allies argued Tertius's survival hinted at divine favor, a future general or statesman. His enemies, including the scheming tribune Publius Clodius, seized the omen as political fodder. Clodius commissioned street poets to sing of the boy who mocks Pluto, painting Scaurus as a man reckless enough to harbor a curse. The senator's solution was quintessentially Roman, bureaucratic theatrics. He petitioned the College of Pontiffs to reconcile Tertius with the gods through a mock funeral. The child was laid in a miniature coffin, paraded through the forum, and symbolically buried in the family mausoleum. Afterward, he was reborn under a new name, Marcus, and his birth records altered to list him as the 3rd son. The pontiffs declared the evil eye satisfied, but whispers lingered. Tertius, now Marcus, thrived. He learned to read Greek by age 5 and out-wrestled boys twice his size. Yet oddities followed him. Stray dogs howled when he passed. Milk soured in his presence. During a sacrifice to Jupiter, the ritual bull broke free, charging Marcus before collapsing at his feet. The harrispecks inspecting the entrails found the liver marbled with black veins, a sign of mortal grudge. Cornelia, desperate, turned to forbidden rites. She buried Tertius's bulla at a crossroads with a doll fashioned in his likeness, a plea to Hecate to redirect the god's gaze. But when a slave dug up the doll days later, its wax face had melted into a scream. As the boy grew, so did his father's political ruin. Senator Scaurus lost re-election after a fire consumed the temple of Vesta, blamed on his unnatural son. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, Scaurus backed Pompey, a fatal miscalculation. Stripped of his rank, he died in exile, the first of the 7 reigns foretold. But Tertius, now a sharp-eyed teenager, remained in Rome. He changed his name again, joined Caesar's legions and vanished into Gaul's mist-shrouded battles. For a time, the curse seemed dormant. The legionary's secret Gaul, 52 BCE, Tertius, now called Marcus Aemilius Pulcher, a name borrowed from a dead cousin, stood knee-deep in the icy waters of the Seine. Around him, Caesar's legions fortified a makeshift camp, their breath fogging in the dawn air. For 10 years, Tertius had buried his past beneath armour and battle scars. Yet the curse clung. Men in his cohort died at twice the rate of others, their throats slit by unseen hands during night watches. Ravens shadowed the legion, perching on standards like sentinels. Even Caesar, during an inspection, paused before Tertius, squinting as if recognizing something. "You have the look of a man who's danced with this," the general remarked. The soldiers laughed. Tertius did not. The Gallic wars were a blur of blood and mud, but Tertius thrived in chaos. He saved a centurion's life at Alesia, earning a promotion to Optio. Yet his comrades kept their distance. They whispered of the night he sleepwalked through camp, reciting funeral dirges in Sabine dialect. All the time a druid captive pointed at him and screamed, "The gate is open! He is the gate!" before biting off his own tongue. When Caesar's letter arrived, summoning the legion to Rome in 49 BCE, Tertius felt the fates tighten their grip. The Rubicon's shallow waters seemed to boil as they crossed, though the others claimed it was a trick of light. In Rome, Tertius was assigned to guard the Senate doors, a post of honor that placed him steps from Caesar's golden chair. Here, the curse stirred anew. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Tertius stood at his post, his sword arm trembling. The Senate buzzed with tension. Cassius and Brutus lingered near Caesar's dais, their togas weighted with concealed daggers. Tertius had dreamed of this moment for weeks. A bull with Caesar's face, its throat slit by a child's hands. That morning, he'd found a dead raven on his doorstep, its wings arranged in the 11th of Caesar's doomed reforms. As Caesar entered, he paused again before Tertius. "Still dancing, soldier?" he quipped. The men chuckled, but Tertius smelled myrrh and iron, the scent of his mother's hidden shrine. When the first dagger struck, Tertius's body locked. His limbs felt weighted by the bulla he'd buried long ago. Brutus's blade flashed. Caesar collapsed, bleeding from 23 wounds. Tertius counted each one, his voice trapped in his throat. Afterward, the assassins fled, and the Senate erupted. Tertius alone remained motionless. A pool of Caesar's blood seeped toward his sandals, parting around his feet as if repelled. That night, washing gore from his armor, he found his reflection aged, lines etched deep, hair streaked white. The curse, it seemed, had claimed its first reign. But Caesar's death was only the beginning. Over the next decade, Tertius drifted through Rome's civil wars like a ghost. He fought for Brutus at Philippi, only to watch him fall on his own sword. He served Octavian at Actium, witnessing Cleopatra's asp curse consume Antony. With each death, Tertius aged decades in days. By the time Octavian became Augustus, Tertius resembled a man of 70, though scarcely 30 winters had passed. The truth crystallized in a Naples brothel. A Syrian seeress, her eyes milky with cataracts, gripped his wrist as he paid. "You are the Septimus," she hissed. "7 reigns you will see, 7 deaths you will outlive. The last will break the world." She spat 3 times to ward off his evil eye. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, found Tertius useful. The emperor's spies reported his uncanny survival, and in 2 BCE, Tertius was summoned to the Palatine. "They say you are a curse," Augustus mused, "but I see a mirror. You reflect Rome's rot, and rot can fertilize." He tasked Tertius with eliminating rivals, exploiting his aura of death. Poisoned figs, rigged chariots, accidental fires. Tertius's presence masked murder as misfortune. Yet with each reign, the curse exacted tolls. Tertius's skin thinned to parchment, his bones creaking like dry reeds. Visions haunted him, his mother's ghost spinning a loom threaded with his hair, Caesar's blood pooling into the Tiber, a child with red curls burying a bulla in the forum. In 14 CE, as Augustus lay dying, he clutched Tertius's arm. "Tell me," the emperor rasped, "what comes after?" Tertius leaned close. "You are the sixth. The seventh will be worse. The seventh reign, 550 words. Rome, 37 CE. Tiberius's villa on Capri stank of salt and paranoia. Tertius, now a skeletal wraith with eyes like cracked glass, shuffled through marble halls, his breath rattling. The seventh reign had come. Tiberius, rotting from within, saw omens in every shadow, and Tertius, the cursed Septimus, was both weapon and target. The emperor's summons came at midnight. Tertius found Tiberius hunched over a map of Rome, his fingers clawing at the parchment. "They say you've outlived 6 rulers," Tiberius rasped. "Tell me, will Caligula be my end?" Tertius's voice, a dry whisper, echoed the seeress's words. "The seventh reign breaks the world." Tiberius laughed, a sound like bones grinding. "Then break it first." The emperor ordered Tertius to cleanse the succession. Targets flooded in, senators, generals, even Tiberius's own kin. But with each death, Tertius's body frayed. His skin peeled like old frescoes. His joints bled black ichor. Visions intensified. His mother's ghost wove his hair into a noose. Caesar's blood pooled into the shape of the empire, and the red-curled child, now a youth, dug up the bulla Tertius had buried decades prior. The child was real. On a moonless night, Tertius tracked him to a Subura slum. The boy, named Lucius, clutched the bulla in grimy hands. "She told me to wait," Lucius said, pointing to a crone's corpse, Tertius's long-dead wet nurse. The bulla pulsed with heat, its inscription legible at last. Tertiv septims. The curse had never been his alone. It was a chain, passed to the 7th son of each generation. Tiberius's reign crumbled. Caligula, the 7th heir in the Julio-Claudian line, sharpened his knives. Tertius, guided by Lucius, understood. The curse was a wheel, grinding Rome to dust. To stop it, the cycle must break. But how? On March 16th, 37 CE, Tiberius died, some said by Caligula's hand. As the new emperor rode into Rome, Tertius stood at the gates, Lucius beside him. Caligula's gaze locked on the bulla. "A pretty trinket," he sneered, snatching it. Tertius's final vision struck. Caligula's reign, a carnival of fire and blood, ending with his corpse rotting in the forum. That night, Tertius and Lucius climbed the Tarpeian rock. The bulla glowed in Lucius's hands. "It's yours now," Tertius said. "Or you can cast it into the void." Lucius, trembling, hurled the amulet into the Tiber. The water boiled, then stilled. Tertius's body disintegrated, ash on the wind. Lucius vanished into the crowd, just another orphan. Caligula's reign unfolded as prophesied. Madness, ruin, assassination. But when his body fell, no 7th son rose. The curse, unanchored, dissolved. Final reflection. Tertius's tale mirrors Rome's obsession with omens, a society shackled by its own myths. Yet in the end, the curse was neither divine nor inevitable, but a choice, to cling to fear or let go. Today, as we pass history through data and dogma, his story whispers, what chains do we forge in the name of fate? Gladiator sweat and love potions, the marketplace of magic, the apothecary of desire Rome, 79 CE. Beneath the newly constructed Flavian amphitheatre, a different kind of spectacle unfolds. Here, in the shadow of the arena's vaults, a black market bazaar thrums with whispered deals. You smell it before you see it. Myrrh, dried blood, and the tang of human sweat. Merchants hawk vials of gladiators' perspiration, jars of Vestal virgins' ashes, and amulets stuffed with wolf fur. But the most coveted item, amatoriums, love potions brewed from the sweat, blood, and saliva of Rome's champion fighters. The trade was both clandestine and ubiquitous. Wealthy matrons disguised in slaves' garb slipped through the crowd, their coin purses heavy. For them, gladiators were more than brutes. They were pharmakoi, living vessels of virility. Their sweat, scraped from the sand after battles, was believed to hold the essence of Mars, god of war and fertility. Pliny the Elder, ever the skeptic, wrote that these potions caused more fevers than feasts, but even he admitted their popularity. No husband's embrace rivals the fantasy of a fighter's ghost. At the heart of this trade stood Decimus Viridius, a one-eyed ex-gladiator turned alchemist. His stall, draped in lion pelts, displayed rows of amber vials labelled SVDORGLADIATORIS. The recipe was simple: mix sweat with crushed rose petals, nightshade, and a drop of the buyer's menstrual blood. Decimus claimed it could ignite passion in a marble statue. His most loyal client, Livia Drusilla, wife of Senator Marcus Aelius. Livia's obsession began innocently. After a decade of childless marriage, her husband's political rivals whispered of her barren womb. Desperate, she purchased a vial of sweat from Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator famed for siring 7 bastards. The potion failed to produce an heir, but awakened a darker craving. Soon, Livia returned weakly, demanding sweat from newer, younger fighters. "I don't pay for old blood," she hissed, tossing coins at Decimus. The senator, oblivious, marveled at his wife's sudden ardor. What he didn't know, Livia had begun hosting midnight unguentariae, ointment parties, where patrician women anointed themselves with gladiator sweat, drank wine laced with powdered bull testicles, and whispered of the arena's unfinished men. The rituals walked a razor's edge between sacrament and scandal, but Decimus's supply chain was fraying. Sweat alone no longer satisfied clients. They demanded hair, teeth, even vernae, gladiator semen. To meet demand, he bribed arena attendants to slip soporifics into fighters' drinks, harvesting their fluids while they slept. One victim, a Germanic champion named Gundahar, awoke mid-procedure and nearly gutted Decimus with a sacrificial dagger. The alchemist survived by swearing an oath to Bacchus. "I am but a vessel for Venus's will." Livia's downfall began with a mislabeled vial. On the eve of the Saturnalia festival, she ingested a potion meant for topical use, a mix of sweat, hyena bile, and cantharidin beetles. Hallucinations followed. She raved of burning loins and tore her stola in the Senate courtyard, screaming for Spartacus. Her husband, humiliated, hired a veneficus, poison expert, to trace the source. The trail led to Decimus's stall. As the sun rose over the amphitheatre, Decimus packed his vials. Livia's trial loomed, and the Senate had declared amatoriums a corruption of Roman virtue. Yet business boomed. Fear, he knew, was the best advertisement. The pact of ash and sweat. The trial of Livia Drusilla was a spectacle even the Flavian amphitheatre couldn't rival. Senators jeered as the prosecutor brandished her vial of amatorium, its hyena bile glinting in the sunlight. Livia, her once proud bearing reduced to a tremor, claimed she'd been bewitched by Eastern sorcery. The Senate, eager to deflect blame, declared gladiator sweat a venenum, poison. Guards stormed the underground bazaar, smashing stalls and dragging merchants to the Tullianum prison. Decimus Viridius fled to the temple of Venus Cloacina, its sewer-adjacent shrine abandoned and reeking of rot. There he found her, Emilia, the disgraced Vestal. Once revered for her purity, she now hid beneath a hooded cloak, her shorn hair regrowing in patchy tufts. She'd been accused of extinguishing Vesta's sacred flame during a tryst. A lie, she claimed, spun by a consul who coveted her family's lands. "I need your pharmaca," she rasped, "not to ignite lust, but to prove it. The flame died naturally. If I can relight it, the gods will absolve me." Decimus laughed. "You want a love potion to seduce fire?" Emilia's gaze hardened. The flame is Vesta's heartbeat. Reignite it, and Rome's favor returns. Her price? Safe passage to Ostia on a grain ship. Decimus agreed, but only if she smuggled him aboard. Their pact hinged on a relic, ashes from the original Vestal flame, stolen by Emilia and hidden in a lead amulet. Decimus blended them with sweat from Gundahar, the Germanic gladiator, whose rage still haunted him. "Fire and fury," he muttered, stirring the mixture. "Let the gods decide." As night fell, they infiltrated the temple of Vesta. Emilia knelt before the cold hearth, hands trembling. Decimus dribbled the potion onto the ashes. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a spark, blue, hungry, leaped from the grate. The flame roared to life, its light purpling the marble walls. Emilia wept. "Vesta forgives." But the fire writhed unnaturally, twisting into the shape of a gladiator's face, Gundahar's. A voice boomed from the coals. "You steal from death. Now death steals." The temple doors slammed shut. Outside, Gundahar's allies surrounded the temple. The Germanic warrior, half mad from Decimus's harvesting, had tracked him using a Defixio curse tablet embedded in his own blood. "You sold my soul in vials," Gundahar growled. "Now I take yours." Emilia barred the doors with sacred scepters. "The flame's alive but tainted," she hissed. "Vesta's anger burns with it." Decimus realized the truth. His potion hadn't reignited divinity. It had fused Vesta's essence with Gundahar's rage. The fire was a bridge between realms, and the gladiator's spirit was climbing through. The purification of fire. Ostia's port reeked of fish guts and fear. Decimus and Emilia hid in a salt trader's attic, watching smoke plume over distant Rome. The corrupted flame had spread, twisting the city into delirium. Priests at the Temple of Jupiter reported statues weeping blood. Gladiators in the Ludus Magnus claimed their wounds glowed like coals. Even the Tiber ran sluggish, its waters thick as pitch. The pair knew the truth. The fire they'd unleashed was merging the divine and the profane, eroding the boundary between gods and mortals. Emilia traced a map of Rome on the dusty floor. "The flame is a cancer," she said. "It feeds on desire, every lustful thought, every drop of sweat sold in the markets. To kill it, we must starve it." Decimus snorted. Starve Rome of desire, easier to drain the sea. But he'd seen the recipe in his nightmares, a potion brewed from opposites, sweat and ash, love and hate, life and death. They returned to the city under false names. The streets teemed with madness. A patrician woman auctioned her husband's soul to the highest bidder. A baker sold bread, leavened with ground bones. At the amphitheatre, Decimus found his old stall reduced to cinders, but beneath the rubble, a single vial survived. Inside, Gundahar's sweat had crystallized into blood-red salt. "The last of his rage," Decimus murmured. Emilia secured the final ingredient, a lock of hair from the new Vestalis Maxima, stolen during a moonless rite. "The purest fire to quench the impure," she said. They retreated to the Cloaca Maxima, its tunnels echoing with the whispers of Cloacina's ghost. The potion required a cauldron of lead to contain chaos, and water from the Tiber's source to restore order. As Decimus stirred, the mixture hissed, emitting vapors that painted visions on the sewer walls. Gundahar's axe splitting the sky. Emilia's trial. Livia Drusilla's hollow eyes. "It's working," Amelia gasped. "But it needs a catalyst." She stepped into the cauldron. Decimus lunged, but she was resolute. "I lit the flame. I'll die with it." The potion seared her flesh, merging her essence with the brew. Her scream echoed through the tunnels, a sound that bent stone and silenced rats. When the steam cleared, only a single drop remained, a black pearl of liquid fire. Above ground, the corrupted flame had consumed the Temple of Vesta, its spire a torch, visible from Ostia. Decimus climbed the steps, the pearl burning his palm. Around him, Rome unravelled. Senators copulated in the streets, slaves crucified their masters, and the air thrummed with the laughter of dying gods. At the temple's heart, the flame had taken form, a writhing giant with Gundahar's face and Vesta's eyes. "You cannot kill desire," it roared. Decimus grinned. "Number, but I can redirect it." He swallowed the pearl. Fire met fire. Decimus's body blazed, incinerating his lies, his greed, his stolen years. The corrupted flame recoiled, its tendrils snuffing as Decimus's sacrifice leached its power. With his final breath, he spat the quenched pearl into the ashes. Rain fell, scalding and sweet, dousing the madness. When dawn broke, Rome was cleansed. The temples stood intact, their flames ordinary. The Tiber ran clear. Survivors spoke of a divine storm, crediting Jupiter. Amelia's name remained cursed, her fate unrecorded. In the cloaca, a single vial rested where Decimus had died. Inside, a drop of black pearl still swirled. A graffiti tag nearby read, "Hic fut mag vas, here lies the magician." Final reflection, Decimus and Amelia's tale is more than a parable of hubris, it's a mirror. Rome's obsession with control and consumption birthed the corruption, not the potion. Today, we chase modern amatoriums, algorithms that addict, chemicals that numb, rituals of excess. The lesson endures. Fire can warm or devour, but only humility decides which. The purification of fire. Ostia's port reeked of fish guts and fear. Decimus and Amelia hid in a salt trader's attic, watching smoke plume over distant Rome. The corrupted flame had spread, twisting the city into delirium. Priests at the Temple of Jupiter reported statues weeping blood. Gladiators in the Ludus Magnus claimed their wounds glowed like coals. Even the Tiber ran sluggish, its waters thick as pitch. The pair knew the truth. The fire they'd unleashed was merging the divine and the profane, eroding the boundary between gods and mortals. Amelia traced a map of Rome on the dusty floor. "The flame is a cancer," she said. "It feeds on desire, every lustful thought, every drop of sweat sold in the markets. To kill it, we must starve it." Decimus snorted. Starve Rome of desire, easier to drain the sea. But he'd seen the recipe in his nightmares, a potion brewed from opposites, sweat and ash, love and hate, life and death. They returned to the city under false names. The streets teemed with madness. A patrician woman auctioned her husband's soul to the highest bidder. A baker sold bread, leavened with ground bones. At the amphitheatre, Decimus found his old stall reduced to cinders, but beneath the rubble, a single vial survived. Inside, Gundahar's sweat had crystallized into blood-red salt. "The last of his rage," Decimus murmured. Amelia secured the final ingredient, a lock of hair from the new Vestalis Maxima, stolen during a moonless rite. "The purest fire to quench the impure," she said. They retreated to the Cloaca Maxima, its tunnels echoing with the whispers of Cloacina's ghost. The potion required a cauldron of lead to contain chaos, and water from the Tiber's source to restore order. As Decimus stirred, the mixture hissed, emitting vapours that painted visions on the sewer walls. Gundahar's axe splitting the sky. Amelia's trial. Livia Drusilla's hollow eyes. "It's working," Amelia gasped. "But it needs a catalyst." She stepped into the cauldron. Decimus lunged, but she was resolute. "I lit the flame. I'll die with it." The potion seared her flesh, merging her essence with the brew. Her scream echoed through the tunnels, a sound that bent stone and silenced rats. When the steam cleared, only a single drop remained, a black pearl of liquid fire. Above ground, the corrupted flame had consumed the Temple of Vesta, its spire a torch, visible from Ostia. Decimus climbed the steps, the pearl burning his palm. Around him, Rome unraveled. Senators copulated in the streets, slaves crucified their masters, and the air thrummed with the laughter of dying gods. At the temple's heart, the flame had taken form, a writhing giant with Gundahar's face and Vesta's eyes. "You cannot kill desire," it roared. Decimus grinned. "Number, but I can redirect it." He swallowed the pearl. Fire met fire. Decimus's body blazed, incinerating his lies, his greed, his stolen years. The corrupted flame recoiled, its tendrils snuffing as Decimus's sacrifice leached its power. With his final breath, he spat the quenched pearl into the ashes. Rain fell, scalding and sweet, dousing the madness. When dawn broke, Rome was cleansed. The temples stood intact, their flames ordinary. The Tiber ran clear. Survivors spoke of a divine storm, crediting Jupiter. Amelia's name remained cursed, her fate unrecorded. In the cloaca, a single vial rested where Decimus had died. Inside, a drop of black pearl still swirled. A graffiti tag nearby read, "Hic fut mag vas." Here lies the magician. Final reflection. Decimus and Amelia's tale is more than a parable of hubris. It's a mirror. Rome's obsession with control and consumption birthed the corruption, not the potion. Today, we chase modern amatoriums, algorithms that addict, chemicals that numb, rituals of excess. The lesson endures. Fire can warm or devour, but only humility decides which. The forgotten gods of kitchen utensils, domestic deities, the hearth's hidden guardians, Rome, 213 CE. In the dim, smoke-stained kitchen of Senator Quintus Valerius's villa, a young enslaved cook named Tertia kneaded dough under the watchful eye of Fornax, goddess of the oven. The brick hearth bore a small niche where Tertia left daily offerings, a pinch of salt, a crumb of yesterday's bread, and a drop of wine stolen from the senator's cellar. Fornax was not one of the grand lairs or penates worshipped in the atrium shrine. She was a working-class deity, her domain so humble, most freeborn Romans forgot her name. Yet Tertia knew better. Without Fornax's goodwill, the bread burned. Without Mortarium, god of the mortar, herbs lost their flavour. And without Culina, spirit of the kitchen itself, the entire household's luck curdled like milk in a thunderstorm. The plague began subtly. First, the senator's best knife chipped while slicing lamb. Then, the olive oil turned rancid overnight. By the time the senator's youngest son died of a fever, the kitchen spirits were frantic. Tertia heard them in the clatter of spoons, the hiss of overboiled broth. Culina's voice, usually a warm hum, sharpened to a screech. "You forget us!" Now you suffer. Domestic deities were the unsung architects of Roman life. Every tool had its guardian, Pultarius for the porridge pot, Cocus for the roasting spit, even the obscure Sterculinus, who presided over compost heaps. Slaves like Tertia, who spent their lives in kitchens, knew their rituals. But as the empire's crises mounted, invasions, inflation, the emperor's paranoid purges, even the pious neglected the small gods. Offerings dwindled, shrines gathered dust. Tertia first sensed the plague's true nature when the senator's wife ordered a suckling pig for a dinner party. The meat, though fresh, reeked of decay. Mortarium's mortar cracked while grinding cumin, and the pestle rolled into the fire. "The gods are angry," Tertia warned the steward. He slapped her. "Fix it, or join the pig in the flames." That night, she ventured into the villa's abandoned colonna sacra, a pantry-turned shrine where generations of enslaved cooks had scribbled prayers on the walls. Faded frescoes depicted Fornax as a stout woman with oven-burned hands, Mortarium as a boy crushing herbs with a stone. Tertia lit a stolen lamp and found a clay tablet buried under rat droppings. Its inscription, written in a slave's clumsy Latin, detailed a lustratio culinae, a purification rite requiring honey, ash, and the blood of a house mouse. The ritual was forbidden. Slaves caught practicing low magic faced crucifixion. But as the plague spread, the senator's wife, now bedridden with boils, the kitchen's well water bubbling like bile, Tertia risked it. She trapped a mouse, pricked its paw, and mixed the blood with ash from Fornax's hearth. Whispering the names of every utensil god she could recall, she anointed the oven, the mortar, even the rusty fish-gutting knife. At dawn, the kitchen awoke. The oven's fire burned blue and odourless. The mortar's crack sealed itself. When Tertia brewed the senator's tonic, his wife's boils faded by noon. The steward, stunned, credited Jupiter. Tertia bit her tongue. But the plague was not merely physical. It festered in the household's neglect. The Valeri had forgotten that gods dwell not just in gold-leafed shrines, but in the patina of a well-used ladle, the grease on a cutting board. As Rome's elites chased grander faiths, Mithras, Isis, Christ, they severed the threads binding them to the mundane divine. Tertia's defiance sparked hope. Other enslaved cooks, heteri and labourers began secret rites. A stable boy left oats for Clitolarius, god of pack saddles. A laundress poured vinegar into a drain to appease Cloacina. Yet the senator's family, oblivious, teetered on the edge of ruin. As Tertia scrubbed scorched pots, Culina's voice returned, softer now. "You remember, but will they?"